up next, our next panel discussion, and it will give insight into the perspective of Caribbean-trained junior doctors working as surgical residents in the United States. I would like to introduce 4 surgical residents from Howard and Morehouse School of Medicine. First up, we have Dr. Shavar South, who is from Jamaica. He is a graduate of the UWI Mona campus, and he's currently a PGY1 general surgery resident at Morehouse, and his goal is to become a specialist in minimally invasive surgery. We also have Dr. Shay Stewart joining us. He's from Barbados. He's a top graduate of the class of 2016 from the UWI Cave Hill campus. Since graduating as valedictorian, he's successfully navigated the match in 2019 to a categorical training position at Howard University. He is currently the Senior Pediatric Surgery Research Fellow at Children's Mercy Kansas City. We also have another Howard cert resident, Dr. Jonathan Mitchell, who's from Jamaica as well. He completed his medical training at the UWI Mona campus and was accepted into a categorical surgical residency position at Howard University in 2018. And he currently serves as a research fellow at Johns Hopkins University. And we have Dr. Sasha Corbin, who's from Antigua. She's currently a PGY1 resident in general surgery at Morehouse School of Medicine. And she was recently recognized with the Above and Beyond Resident Award. She completed her medical degree at UWI Cave Hill campus, where she also graduated with honors, and she plans to complete a fellowship in colorectal surgery and has a keen interest in global surgery, focusing on care for underserved populations. Welcome all, welcome all. Hi.
Thank you, Courtney.
No problem. I'm so happy that you're able to join me today. And I think your perspective definitely it might juxtapose the previous panels, because you're closer to exams. I see a lot of questions about exams and when to do exams in the chat. And I think y'all are the best. You are the best group to answer those questions. So I'm going to go through, and I just want to know how each of you reached the States. Go ahead, Sasha.
So my experience was, I knew from the beginning, obviously I wanted to be a surgeon. And when I looked at what the DM program offered and how I saw other residents progressing through the DM program, I knew, well, I wanted to pursue a residency in the US. I wanted to ensure that I had access to the resources and all of the other great things available here in the US. Of course, like you mentioned, when I made that decision, I had no idea how to go through it. And then I looked to people like Shay, because Shay was ahead of me. And there was another resident who was in New York. And I reached out to them and I said, hey, what can I do? So the route I took was, I did do a Kaplan course. After I finished I graduated in 2017 and I decided to do my internship in Barbados. The reason why I decided that, because I wanted to have that opportunity open to me if I wanted to come back to practice in the Caribbean. So I did my internship, and after internship, I took time off, just like Dr. Linsu had recommended. I said, I know personally I cannot study and work. So I said, I'm going to take the time off. I did a Kaplan course. I did it in New York because I prefer live lectures. And after doing that Kaplan course, I still took some more time because I realized that, yes, medicine is supposed to be the same thing. How we learned it and the emphasis that was placed on certain things in the Caribbean was slightly different to what is expected for these exams. They're completely different to what we do. Yeah. So I took that time to study for the exams, and then I took step 1 and I tried to get everything out of all of the exams back to back. So step 1, step 2, CS and CK. And after that, I must say, before that, because I already knew I wanted to go to the US, I made sure that I got into an elective program in my 4th year of medical school. And that's when I went to Yale and I did an elective in general surgery, emergency general surgery. And I think that was very important in terms of getting a letter of recommendation, seeing and understanding how things are done here. So then once I did all of my steps, I then obviously entered the match and interview process, and I matched into a preliminary position here at Morehouse School of Medicine, and it's been awesome. And luckily, both Shavar, myself, and another resident, we have also matched into categorical position. So after we had that foot in the door, it opened so many opportunities for us, and we're now categorical.
Thanks so much for that, Sasha. I'm going to let you tell your story, Shavar. If you can go ahead and tell me how you got to the United States. You're muted.
Good evening, guys. I think for me, the most important thing for all of the attendees that are interested in pursuing residency here is to, one, make that decision very early. It's not an idea that you should flirt with, because if you flirt with the idea of doing it here versus staying in Jamaica or whichever other countries you guys are from, then your results will likely reflect that, because it will be a half-hearted attempt. So I think it's a decision you should make early, commit to it if you're going to do it, and then put the work in, and then ultimately the results will show. For me, I decided more so towards the end of my third year in medical school that I wanted to do the surgery. I wasn't sure where I was going to do it. I had great mentors at the University of the West Indies in Mona, and I could have easily seen myself doing my surgery residency there. I didn't make up my mind to do the USMLE exams until after I finished medical school towards the end of my internship year. That's when I decided that I was going to pursue the exams. I started preparing for it beginning of my SHO year, and I took my first exam at the end of my SHO year. And then I did step 2 CK. By the time I got around to doing CS, it was no longer a requirement. So I went through the pathways, as did Sasha, I believe. So that was generally the general pathway that I took towards completing the USMLE exams, and then I entered the match. I did not do any paid courses. I believe a significant number of the attendees, maybe even the majority, may not be able to afford to do these paid courses because they're pretty expensive. My resources entail just using the first aid book, watching the Kaplan videos that maybe 95% of medical students have access to, being passed down from years ahead. And then I use the Q banks. That's what I used, and I think it served me well, and it will serve most people well. And I mean, it got me here. It got a lot of other people here, I'm sure. So that's the general pathway that I followed in order to get to this point.
Thanks for that, Shavar. So I'm going to move on to Shay. Just give me an idea of how you reached the United States, and maybe if you did, I know you did an elective at Emory, so if you could talk about that briefly as well.
Hi, everyone. My journey was a little bit different. I actually didn't decide to come to the US very early. I did step 1 purely by accident because I had this love affair with Emory University when I was in medical school. I loved Atlanta, everything about it. So Emory was just this place that I really wanted to be. But to do an elective there, you had to do step 1. So that's the only reason I even found out anything about USMLE. So I did USMLE just at the end of my 3rd year in medical school, going into 4th year. I don't know how I studied for that and doing rotations at the same time, but I did it and I did pretty well. Did my elective at Emory, got some good letters, but my elective was in nephrology. IMGs aren't really allowed to do electives and surgery at many places. Emory was one of them. But that didn't deter me. I figured, any experience is good experience. After I completed that, I did step 2 CK during my 4th year, step 2 CS just before MBBS. And I thought doing those things before MBBS really helped both for USMLE and, the MBBS exams. And then I applied for the match 2 years after graduation because I wanted to get some work experience. So I did 2 years in ENT, then I applied a match categorical in general surgery at Howard University Hospital. I did step 3 as well just before my application. So all steps were completed prior to the application. So that's my journey, and now I'm doing pediatric surgery research because, as everyone has said, research is very important. I didn't do very much of it during medical school, as most of us have not. But when you get here, you kind of realize that your CV looks like everyone else's. Everyone is bright, everyone can operate. But I think research is that one thing that gives you academic currency to really showcase yourself and differentiate yourself from others. So if you have the opportunity to do research, no matter the level that you're at or the stage that you're at, go for it. Doesn't matter if it's what you want to do, doesn't matter if you like it. It's kind of a must right now in 2022. Next year, the need will only increase.
Thank you so much for that, Shay. And Dr. Mitchell, can you give me your story about how you reached the United States?
Yeah, so I think I had done my step 1 exam during my 3rd year. At the time, I didn't make a conscious decision that I wanted to come to the US. It was just, I mean, I like doing exams and it was just something to do. So I did the exam in my 3rd year and finished MBBS. I decided I wasn't going to do the second one until after, so I could focus on just passing my MBBS exam. And in the 6 months after MBBS, while I was an intern, I did my step 2 CK exam and CS exam. That was 2016, and then 2017, following year, I applied. And during the application process, I got step 3 out of the way. I took about a month off just to study for it. It's not a particularly difficult exam. You just really need to commit some time to it, less than you do for step 2 and 1. And I got out of the way in the hopes that it would improve my application. I don't think it did, but you know, it helped me in residency because I didn't have to worry about getting it done like most 1st and 2nd year residents do, because you have to get it done within the first 18 months of your residency. At some programs, they're very strict about that. They'll kick you out if you don't. So, and if you think it's difficult to do while you know you're practicing back home in the Caribbean, it's even more so difficult here because of how they really suck your life away in residency. So I got that out of the way before I came. Matched into Howard as a categorical. I didn't get many interviews. I got like 4, one of which was categorical and the rest prelim, but I got the spot at Howard and I completed 3 years of the general surgery residency and got an opportunity to come to Johns Hopkins to the research of the transplant department. So I've been here for the past year. I'm going to be here for another year doing research with them. And yeah, that's kind of my story.
Thanks a lot for that. What I want to know from you, studying in the Caribbean, then changing to come to the US, what were the most challenging aspects of that transition? I'm going to go with Sasha again first. You have to, go ahead and unmute, Sasha.
Sorry, just unmuted. So there are different aspects of the challenges associated. So there's obviously the social challenges associated with coming. You have to remember that you're now moving across oceans. Like I thought that, hey, you know, I travel so often, it's nothing. I'm used to living away. It was a little bit of an adjustment. You know, you're now by yourself, unless you're moving with family, that makes it a lot easier because your hours are long. But there was that bit of, okay, you're now by yourself. You have to make time for yourself and to find time to do things that you want to do and make you happy outside of work, because work can consume you. You're going to be working 12 hours a day, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but you have to make that time for yourself to do things that you genuinely love to do. Outside of that, of course, you know, coming to a whole new hospital, everything is going to be completely different, especially like the electronic medical record system. Learning that is imperative. Try your best to figure it out as soon as possible because it just makes your life so much easier once you understand your way. And don't hesitate to ask questions. Everybody is new. They expect that you will not understand how to do certain things, but being open to say, hey, I'm not sure how to do this. Can you show me? And that's the part that's going to separate you from others who may think that, oh, we know everything, we're going to do this. But don't hesitate to ask a question. And I was lucky to be a part of an amazing residency program where you never felt like you were out of place to ask for help. And that's important to know and practice going into it. I would say those are probably the two most challenging things for me moving.
I think that was some really good advice that you said there. Remembering to ask for help. I think sometimes, especially coming from the Caribbean, where you feel like you've been practicing, you've been doing this for a little while, you feel like if you should, know how to do everything, or not everything, but you should be more aware of your surroundings than maybe your counterparts. So I think that that's a big step, remembering to ask for help. What about you, Shavar? What was challenging for you?
I think, again, it's to echo what Sasha said, and to add to it, is you have to, you're coming, a lot of us will come here from the Caribbean having been in clinical medicine beyond medical school already. You come here and you essentially feel like you're starting all over again in a program. There are new ways to do things. Things are done a lot differently here than, from what I remember being back in Jamaica. So you have to adjust to that very quickly. Thankfully for us here, we had a very good group of seniors and other first years that were very patient with us. They answered all of our questions, no matter how ridiculous some of them might seem. So that was very important, to help us to, acclimatize very quickly and to get into the flow of things very quickly and to make our lives easier. I think a bigger deal is made of the whole electronic medical records thing than needs to be. I think it's not very hard to figure out. It takes some time, and it does make your life very, very easy once you get used to it. So those first few weeks, pay attention to how it's used and so forth. And once you get that down, it makes things a lot easier. In terms of how to study, here versus back there, I think if you had good habits from before, then that can translate very easily to being here. The hours, I mean, as I'm sure my colleagues, they will speak on how ridiculous the hours can be sometimes. But if you had good habits from before, I think you will learn and figure out ways to fit in time to study, as Sasha mentioned, fit in time to do other things that you previously did that you enjoy doing, so that you have a fairly balanced life. So probably the most difficult thing for me, I have an aunt here that I was lucky to, be able to stay with. But it's just, becoming friends with new people that you have to spend a lot of your time with. I was never very sociable, so it was particularly challenging early on, but they're a great group of people. I love working with them. So, they've made my life very easy, and hopefully I've made their lives easy. But that was probably the most challenging thing for me coming here.
Thanks for that, Shavar. So what about you, Shay? What would you say was the most challenging thing adjusting to the United States?
For me, I think just we graduate UV with a clinical acumen that is far superior to our US counterparts, and that is not in a arrogant or boastful way. It's just how it is. We have a lot more clinical experience going through medical school, and it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes coming to the US. You realize that the training from your counterparts is a little bit different. Secondly, I think this research thing, it is a word that we know about in a very small way, especially, well, for me, I knew about it in a very small way. And it really makes you feel very uncomfortable with everyone else having 5, 10 publications coming in, and you're just like, what is an abstract? That was me. That was me a year ago before being a research fellow. I was like, what is an abstract? What is a manuscript? I don't know what any of these things mean. So I think those are the two most difficult things for me. So which is why I did a research fellowship.
And that's interesting because I know the research fellowship definitely adds gravitas to your application, but just the perspective that you added there, that it almost is even more useful for you coming from a non-research background and then giving you the opportunity now to catch up with your counterparts who may have had greater emphasis being placed on that during their medical school career.
Absolutely. I think it levels the playing field significantly.
All right, that's some great advice. Jonathan, what about you? What was the most difficult thing acclimatizing to in the United States?
So the cold, probably. I don't know why no one said that.
No one is taking that into consideration, huh?
It's cold for 6 whole months, especially in the Northeast, which that doesn't happen. We don't even have seasons in Jamaica. The lowest it will get is like 23 degrees Celsius, which is a joke here. So that was definitely for me the hardest thing getting used to. And in my first year, I was, walking to the hospital, taking the train and the bus and stuff. And you have to like walk on ice. Like I'd never walked on ice in my entire life. And all of a sudden I not only have to walk on ice, but do so briskly and get to the hospital on time. So that was tough. And just the research stuff, as Shay said, I think most of us here and most of the people on the call, and even if not everyone, you're at some point in time during your academic career, you felt like, you were really good at what you were doing, you felt really comfortable in the hospital managing patients. For us, I'm sure Shay feels similarly, when we started our research fellowships, we were, at the back of the pack. Everybody was considerably ahead of us in terms of just the knowledge around epidemiology and biostatistics and what's really required of you to get something from an idea to publish in a journal after being reviewed thoroughly by your peers. And that weighs very, very heavily on you, especially coming from an environment in surgery where it's all about performing optimally every single day, where you're coming to this new environment and you're not able to do that, as much as you'd like to. So that was very difficult for me to acclimatize to. But you apply yourself on a daily basis, and eventually you pick up the skills and be able to perform as Shay and myself have been able to do over the course of the past year. As far as studying is concerned, as Shavard pointed out, if you do have good habits, they will translate very well. And I think something that people don't really give enough credit is, especially when you become a resident, every amount of reading you can get in counts, even if it's just 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. If you can take some time to just read, that will help you. It goes a long way, it really adds up. And the big thing here is the ABSITE, which is an annual multiple choice exam that we did that's similar to the kind of step format. It's about 200 and something questions. And it's really a similar type of preparation where you just do a lot of questions, and those things are really easy to do now. You can do them on your phone, you can do them on your iPad, computer, you can do them on the hospital workstations. So I think once you pick up the little habits that you need to really perform academically, the studying is not difficult. And I don't know how Shavar came to the conclusion that the EMR was easy, but that was very, very, very difficult for me, because all EMRs are different. Not every hospital has the same EMR. And for us at Howard, we rotate at many different institutions, and all those institutions have different EMRs. So if you're switching rotations every 10 weeks, you have to learn a new AMR every 10 weeks. And when you get there on day 1, day 2, everyone expects you to be going, and you're trying to learn how to sign an order. So those are the things that were probably the most difficult for me.
Thanks for that. And addressing the weather, because clearly everybody was skirting around that issue. I know Atlanta gets very cold, don't play. Thank you so much, Shay, for going in the chat and answering so many questions. I mean, you definitely are a hero when it comes to USMLE and US mentorship in a way, because I know I came to you when it was my time to do my exams, and you honestly so graciously answered everything that I wanted to know the answer to. One question that I see here, how can someone go about getting a chance to do an elective in the US? I'm gonna choose Shay just because you did one.
I actually don't remember how I found mine. I think I just, again, I had this love affair with Emory, and I just scoured the website and eventually found something. I don't even think the elective that I did is even being offered anymore. So I would actually have to turn over to Sasha, because Sasha did an elective in the US in surgery. I did mine in medicine, nephrology. So I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead, Sasha, and let us know how you pull that one off.
So mine was actually a sub-internship. And at the time, I didn't have a clue what a sub-internship was. I just knew that I wanted to do an elective in the US, and I reached out to anybody that I knew was a doctor in the US. And I fortunately had a cousin who actually previously went to Yale. And she says, I think they do this thing called a sub-I. You can kind of reach out and see. And I just went on their website and I found it. And they actually do not usually they only take students in their final year of medical school. But because our med school program was 5 years total, and at fourth year, we would kind of be, I don't know, they made the allowance because I was in my fourth year at the time, and I just reached out. I sent in my application, and of course, you had to have letters of recommendations as well. And I think definitely having a cousin that had previously gone to Yale, she was able to put in a good word for me as well. So networking is extremely important, and don't hesitate to say, hey, can you please put in a good word for me? I think sometimes we're a little bit too worried about asking for a favor or asking somebody to put in a good word, and that gets you a very long way. It's not only in the Caribbean, but here in the US. I didn't think that it would, but it really does. So I would say, if you know anybody, if you know anyone who's an attending, anyone who's currently a resident, anyone who was previously a resident, reach out to them and say, hey, do you know of any programs available? I want to do an elective. I want to do some research. There's always research available. Sometimes it's going to be difficulty in terms of you being from the Caribbean and not having like the necessary paperwork to come to the US to do that. But just inquire. And that's all you can do. Search through websites for programs and go online and see if they have anything available. That would be my suggestion.
Thanks a lot for that. One thing that I think I personally found out about this recently. When it comes to the J1 visa, the limitation you have on the amount of time you can complete your training. This, as I said, this is very important, attendees, and something that I would like Dr. Mitchell, because I know you were discussing it with me just the other day. So if you could just talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Up until like yesterday, I was talking to the ECFMG about this. So this is like a big deal, especially those of us who are on J1s who are subject to the 2-year home requirement. So if it is that you are subject to the 2-year home requirement after you're completed your training, which is supposed to be 5 years, you're required by the ECFMG who sponsored your J1 to return home for 2 years. Now, there are ways around that 2-year home requirement, and it comes in the form of what they call a waiver. The waiver process is very, very complicated, a bit difficult to kind of explain in the context of this webinar, but there are different circumstances that can help you to qualify for a waiver that unfortunately, I'm not really able to explain to you very well. But in the long and short of it is, you have 7 years in total after starting your training here in the US to complete your training. And that includes residency, fellowship, everything. That is the extent of the J1, and it's kind of difficult to get extensions past that point. So for those of you, when you do match, that's something that you need to take into consideration as you plan out your time here. So Shay and I, we are doing 2 years of research, and we'll have to complete 5 years of general surgery residency. So at the end of our residency, we'd have, taken up the entire 7 years allotted for the J1, and we'll have to find other provisions to complete our training. And there are other visas that you can get, but the process is considerably complicated for those of us who are on J1. So this is something that you really do need to take into consideration. And when you do match, that you should bring up with your programs in terms of what their plan is for you. Because some programs have mandatory research time, and if you plan to do a fellowship afterwards, that may not be something that you're able to do in terms of going out for 2 years of research. So maybe something that you have to discuss with your program when you do actually get there.
Thank you so much for that. I know you also made reference to the climate towards immigration when it comes to getting surgical residency posts. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that, how the impact that has on the availability of posts?
So all the stuff I just explained to you, it sounds very tedious. There's someone in an administrative role who has to deal with that, who has to facilitate you actually being there at the program. And if you guys understand anything about America, they don't like administrative technicalities. So it's kind of a hard sell to bring IMGs in, even though we do provide so much for the different institutions because of our work ethic and the diversity that we bring to institutions. It's a bit difficult for them to make these provisions to accommodate us. So that does add to the difficulty in terms of getting into programs. And that's why you have to really sell yourself as a strong candidate. With your scores, you have to be competitive scores above the average of the US graduate counterparts, and you have to build up on your CV, show them that you're much more than just someone who can score well on a multiple choice exam, or a doctor who is supposed to be clinically talented, that you do have an academic inclination and the skills that are required of you to have a career in academics in medicine.
So Dr. Mark Grant is actually still here with us, and he actually has a bit more to say when it comes to the waiver and the J1 process. So I'm just gonna let him jump in really quickly, just to give us an idea of the insight. Go ahead, Dr. Grant.
So I've been listening, and I've been quite impressed with the residents who are there right now. So if I were to speak directly to the length of time of training, it's a bit more complicated. So many people may come in and start as a prelim 1, and then may get a prelim 2 year, and then find themselves going into the lab. Where that 7-year restriction comes in, the CVIS will prevent you if they don't see that you are progressing as expected. So it is very important that you're making progress to ensure that you are finished the 5 years of residency training within that 7-year period. And so if you find yourself being there for 3 years after doing a number of preliminary years, they may not necessarily allow you to continue unless you change to something else. That's one. Two, J1 waiver process is not that difficult, provided you understand a few things. It's working in an underserved area, and underserved areas can vary widely. Don't complain about the cold. I live in Maine and it gets to -12 quite often, but it has a lot of benefits. When you've completed your residency, you apply for a job and you find an underserved area, the hospital actually covers everything. They do everything. The most disgusting part of it is that they'll send you, the hospital attorney will send you a bunch of papers that you need to sign. So get into residency, finish residency. The J1 waiver process is really not that complicated. After you've completed a J1 waiver, after 3 to 4 years, you get a green card, and then a citizenship follows 5 years later. My wife and I were able to complete that process. And should anybody need any help with that particular aspect, Courtney has my contact and you can definitely reach out to me. And the last thing is networking. I think Dr. Corbin mentioned reaching out and getting somebody to assist. The network is much more extensive than you think. And I think this provides an opportunity where you would have run into persons like myself, Dr. Linsu, but the network is much more extensive than that. And so networking works much more than anything else. As a matter of fact, I do think sometimes that networking probably gets you further than your USMLE score. So the USMLE score is very important, but I do think Dr. Corbin's point about the networking is great. And the last thing I said before, the last thing is, don't be afraid to end up in a place that you've never heard before. So I ended up in a place called Bangor, Maine, that I go, where the heck is Bangor, Maine? And it's been very difficult to get me extricated from here for the last 11 years. I love it. You may think that because it's not one of those places that we're familiar with in the Caribbean, that you're unable to socially thrive there, it's been a great experience and it opens my eyes. So that's my offering.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Grant. And I think, I mean, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I think he also answered one of the questions the panelists had for their own careers going forward. So I think that was great. And I don't think there are any more questions in the chat for you guys. And truthfully, I honestly feel like this session has been so educational. I really wish we could go on forever, but I really think that Dr. Johnson's time is now. So thank you so much. And as I said, these panelists also were quite enthusiastic. I didn't have to pull any arms. Everybody was like, sure. And they showed up on time and ready. So thank you so much, guys.